welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We're going to start this evening with a Quaker Speak video.
Wilson. I'm a member of Friendship Friends meeting in Greensboro, North Carolina. Yearly meeting, conservative. It is, I think, impossible to get the full benefit of any faith tradition without immersing oneself in it. I believe, like the Sufis, that where thee digs thy well and where I dig my well may be on different creeks, but they come from the same living water and they flow to the same ocean. I feel that there are, in fact, many paths to God, but they are distinct paths. And that if one is intent on making that journey, the best way there is to follow the path of the faith tradition he has chosen. The temptation, if we don't, is to avoid those things we don't like. If we begin to treat our spiritual growth as a buffet or a salad bar, we're only human. We take more than we need of the stuff we really like, and we shy away from the stuff that doesn't taste good or that gave us heartburn. But it's the nature of the faith journey that it is often those things that we don't like the taste of that are making the growth in us that we need in order to go forward. We live in an age of rampant individualism. It's all around us. We breathe it in with every breath. And I think that one of the hardest things about committing to the Quaker faith tradition is exchanging that individualism for a sense of corporate discernment and corporate wisdom. We go through our meetings and we're asking, my meeting is not giving me the things I think I want for my spiritual journey. It's a question I hear all the time. But I think the real question, the question that will help us more, is to ask, how can I be the member my meeting needs me to be in order to do the spiritual work God has given it to do? So to make that switch, first of all, requires a great deal of courage to give up the fact that I'm going to be my own defense here. I'm going to look out for myself and be responsible for my own spiritual journey. And it takes a lot of trust to feel safe and secure, to feel that, yes, these people are seeking to discern God's will just as I am, that together we can discern it better, and I have nothing to fear. That's very hard, very hard. Quakerism has not been a perfect journey for me. I have never sat down in a perfect Quaker meeting and never expect to. But even those difficult places are places where we grow, and we grow as a community. So that's the concept I've been trying to articulate in my writings and in my talkings about Quakerism, is that it's not a salad bar situation, is that you have to step inside the tradition, commit to the tradition, commit to something larger than yourself. And then you begin to understand, oh, okay, this is the part of the tradition that's real for me. I can take this in. But you can't stand outside the tradition and even understand it, much less critique it.
I'm going to very briefly, can everyone see the screen share with the slide deck?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to very briefly mention the first four of the Quaker core beliefs as an intro. There is living, dynamic spiritual presence at work in the world, which is both within us and outside of us. There is that of God in everyone. Each person is capable of the direct and unmediated experience of God. And then for tonight, our understanding and experience of God is nurtured and enlarged in community. So after this brief introduction, Patricia will present her leadings and learnings on the fourth Quaker belief. And then we have two friends, Jackie and Catherine, who will share their perspectives. And then we invite everyone to join in and share. And we'll close in silence with an invitation to return Wednesday, June 28th. My one slide, and this comes from the same book I quoted a couple of meetings ago. Ideally, our friends' meetings are covenant communities. It is God who gives us to one another and to the community. Our relationship with others is divinely mediated. And for me tonight, the part of that message that speaks is that we are God's gift to each other. And as the Quaker elder was saying a moment ago, we all realize, but it isn't necessarily easy to accept, that God knows much better than me what I need. So a lot of times his gifts come in terms of growth and pain.
Okay. All right. So, whoops. Yeah, at the beginning. Sorry, just trying to get the side thing going. For some reason, it's, oh, I see the problem.
Just go over.
No, I know the problem is I've got another bar on top of it. That's the problem. There we go. Okay, so for when I came into the silent assemblies of God's people, I felt a secret power among them, which touched my heart. And as I gave way unto it, I found the evil weakening in me and the good raised up. And so I became thus knit and united unto them, hungering more and more after the increase of this power and life, whereby I might feel myself perfectly redeemed. It's Robert Barclay. He was a Scottish friend who was convinced by George Fox and was in fact the first person to really attempt a full theology, as it were, as a way in which to combat the attacks that Quakers came under. It's called, was in short, the short name for it is Barclay's Apology. And the next time, I think we'll be talking a bit more about that. So Quakerism is a real paradox. When we come to Quakerism, we're all told that we all individually can receive revelation from the inward light, from the divine, and that we don't need anybody to mediate that relationship, and that we can then receive wisdom and guidance and then act upon it. However, we can't do it unless we're part of a community. It is a real paradox. We cannot practice Quakerism alone, because if we try and practice Quakerism alone, it's very easy to slide off into a kind of narcissistic, personal, spiritual conversation with ourselves. And the tradition that Quakers have had for the last 370 years has absolutely shown that the power of Quakerism resides in our community relationships. When we first come to Quakerism, certainly speaking for myself, and we could come to any faith community. Initially, we say, what can this do for me? What can this do for me in my life? We are aware of a lack in our own lives, and we want something to fill it. I certainly remember coming to Quakerism myself, to Goose Creek, and having very much that feeling that I wanted something to be given to me that could fill the God-sized hole in my heart. And carrying on and searching for a way in which to get that God-sized hole filled. Inevitably, we are disappointed because Quaker communities, every Quaker meeting, as Lloyd Lee Wilson said, is not perfect. It's full of humans. It's full of people with their own agendas. It's full of people struggling with their own issues. And inevitably, somebody will give some ministry that will not really speak to us, or there will be an upset in the first day school, or you just, you feel like somehow you're not being served. And at this point, many people leave. If you stick with it, though, eventually you cross a threshold where instead of asking the question, what can Quakerism and Goose Creek do for me? And you ask the question, what can I do? What can I give to this community? Because you begin to understand that we are in a conversation that is both horizontal and vertical. The horizontal conversation, perhaps this is, with the divine, and the vertical with each other. This is incredibly important in Quakerism because we don't have a doctrine and we don't have a creed. And so we don't have something we can kind of hold on to in a way that perhaps is offered in other religious and faith traditions. So we need to work within our community to be able to understand and to gain feedback and to give, to understand that we are in fact all knit together, and that the path that we tread is a communal path. The phrase that I like about this, somebody once, this was I don't think in relationship to Quakerism, but to faith, is that spirit is the river and the faith community is the cup. If we can step into the river of spirit, we can have all of the incredible experiences and feel like we are in fact, working within a great stream of which goes way beyond Quakerism. But we need to work within a cup because we are so human and we are so fallible. We need to have the community to love us, to check us, to challenge us, and to help us to move beyond ourselves and our own individual preoccupations. Interestingly, Quakerism did not start off like that. It was a charismatic movement. There was absolutely no intention of starting any new faith tradition. There was the feeling that, in fact, something new was completely overtaking the world, and that Quakers and the First Friends had this incredible truth that was then going to change everything, was going to change, the world. To be released from the bounds of doctrine and creed and a hierarchy was really heady stuff. And so there was some really, really extraordinary personal revelation. This included friends dressing in sackcloth and ashes, interrupting Anglican church services, coming up the aisles yelling, "Repent, repent." A group of Quakers decided that they needed to appear in public naked. They would go to the market absolutely as naked as the day they were born, and they would essentially call upon people to clothe themselves in righteousness. Tonight, for this particular, I've actually got my Clothe Yourself in Righteousness t-shirt on. See my naked Quakers? This particular picture you see here was in fact published in an anti-Quaker pamphlet. Pamphleteering in the Quaker times in that time was their version of social networking, of tweeting. And there was an enormous amount published. Quakers were publishing, people were attacking Quakers in pamphlets, people would answer the pamphlet with a pamphlet. And this came from an anti-Quaker pamphlet, essentially showing what extraordinarily peculiar and not to mention offensive people Quakers were. This whole thing came to a head in 1656 when James Naylor, who was a very talented preacher, was in some ways competition for George Fox to be the leader of the Quaker movement. He had a great following in the south of England, and one day he was led with his followers to enter Bristol on a donkey, essentially reenacting Christ's entry into Jerusalem. This was way too much for the authorities. He was dragged off before the judge. He was found guilty of blasphemy. He had a B branded on his forehead. He had his tongue bored through with a hot iron. He was thrown in jail, and all of which was bad enough. But the other thing is he deeply embarrassed the Quaker leadership. They really felt at this point that this whole thing had got a little out of hand. So they began to herd the cats. They began to move from being a charismatic movement to being an organized sect. What they did was the way they described it was that they were creating gospel order, or at least they called it gospel order, which was an organizing principle by which friends came to a clearer understanding of their relationship to God and all of the divine manifestations and the responsibilities of that relationship. Gospel order is pervasive. It exists outside of humanity. It is the order and harmony of all of creation. It characterizes every part of creation when that part is functioning according to the divine will. Everything from the shining of stars as well as the making of bread. So creating gospel order, essentially restoring our relationship to the creation and to the creator, led to, and I think it's a really beautiful idea. It led to the establishment of monthly meetings and yearly meetings in which friends were accountable and which they were accountable to friends. They set up second morning meeting, which was kind of a censorship bureau where they took this incredible plethora of pamphlets and were essentially, they censored them and they decided what would go out under the Quaker name and what would not. They also set up what was called the Meeting for Sufferings, which incidentally still exists in Britain. The Meeting for Sufferings was essentially to be the public face of Quakers, where they would try and persuade the authorities not to persecute Quakers so severely. They would represent Quakers, and they would also collect money and support the families and friends of those who were imprisoned, as well as those who were in prison. Today in Britain, the Meeting for Sufferings is essentially, it's a public face of Britain yearly meeting that issues all of these statements representing the whole of Quakerdom in Britain. They also created men and women's business meetings. And we see in this organization the beginning of Quaker process, something we are all very familiar with, something that certainly speaking for myself, I alternately revere and which irritates the heck out of me. Because it's in Quaker process that I guess the rubber hits the road, the grit is in the machine there. And it's something that is absolutely unique to the Religious Society of Friends. As Quakerism, and I'm going to just fly over this bit, Quakerism became more and more respectable. Once persecution had ended, Quakers became more and more determined to separate themselves from the world. They created a hedge around their communities. They really did become a peculiar people, very, very noticeable, very involved with many social justice causes, such as prison reform and human treatments of mentally ill. But it was also a time in which the Quaker communities began to police their members. There was a certain way in which a Quaker was meant to behave, and if they stepped beyond those bounds, they risked being read out of meeting. This is the period they call Quietism, and most people read out of meeting for marrying people who were not Quakers. In many ways, this was not what we'd call the shining moment of Quakerism or the shining century of Quakerism. However, it was in this time that Quakers really put their shoulders to the wheel with some very important things, such as abolition of slavery and just being a kind of a voice for peace. So it wasn't all bad, but I just wanted to mention that. And it was on this period, John Woolman was part of this particular period of Quakerism. And it's interesting to read his journal because you really do see individual revelation being tested in the community. John Woolman never just had an individual revelation to either go and speak to Quaker slaveholders or to go and visit Native Americans or to speak up for the poor. He always took his leading to his monthly meeting where further discernment took place. And when he went off, when everything was clear and he was given a traveling minute, he never went alone. He always went with another Quaker. Because, and this continues to this day, we need to be aware of how fallible we are and that we need a check. We need a check within our community. We need to take our discernment into our community and see if, in fact, what we are discerning is of God or is of ourselves. The central part of Quaker community is, of course, meeting for worship. That has been from the very beginning and continues to be today. Thomas Kelly in 1938 said, "Worship does not consist in achieving a mental state of concentrated isolation from one another. But in the depths of common worship, it is as if we found our separate lives were all one life, within who we live and move and have our being." Sometimes I see meeting for worship and silent worship described as meditation. I don't think this is accurate, and that's not what we're aiming for here. What we're aiming for is to wait together, to listen together for what the divine is trying to share with us, is to be open to spirit moving amongst us, so that we achieve a kind of unity that allows us to grow in our own faith, but also to grow as a faith community, and then to take what we have to share with the world out into the world. So even if we are in meeting for worship, are not called to vocal ministry, although each person must never, ever think, I am never going to be called to vocal ministry. Some people are called more frequently, and for some, it is considered a gift that they must nurture. But everybody may be called upon because we are all ministers one unto another. But even if we are not called to vocal ministry, our waiting and our listening is just as important. We are helping to create that great, the cup, out of which personal revelation comes, out of which corporate revelation comes, out of which we are moved to act in a way that is in fact divinely led as opposed to ego led. I'm sure all of us at one time or another have felt very powerfully in meeting for worship, the Spirit moving. Not every meeting is like that, but certainly sometimes we have what we call a gathered meeting or a covered meeting, where the presence of Spirit is so palpable that it is impossible to deny. Certainly I have had that experience, and I know that pretty sure that all of you have had that experience. And sometimes it's that experience which keeps us coming back. It may happen twice a year, maybe, or more if we're lucky. But it keeps us coming back because you can never forget when you have been at a gathered meeting, when you have suddenly felt being lifted up beyond your individual self into something much larger. It's important to come to meeting for worship, even during one's personal dry spells, or in the spells in which perhaps meeting is struggling, because there's a kind of faithfulness in that, which is part of being a covenant community. I'm going to talk a little bit more about covenant community just before I close, but it is our presence in the hills and in the valleys is really important. And Quakerism itself has experienced peaks and valleys. But my experience is that if we are faithful, we will once more begin to experience the peaks. So the other part, if you're thinking of the cross, meeting for worship is the vertical. The horizontal is meeting for worship with a concern for business. What we're seeking in our business meetings, and it's important to remember that it is meeting for worship with a concern for business, is we are not looking for consensus, which is a secular method, a rational process producing general agreement. We are seeking the sense of the meeting. We are engaging in a spiritual process that will produce a spirit-led decision. We are looking for what we are led to do as a group. We're not looking for the way in which we can all agree. We're not looking for a compromise, although sometimes we do compromise. We are looking for the sense of the meeting. And when the clerk says, are we all in agreement or do we approve? He should in fact be saying, are we in unity? So the purpose of meeting for business is to seek together the way of truth, the will of God in temporal matters. And so we must experience it in a worshiping spirit. So to use the expression gospel order, which is not something we hear very often, if we are going to live in gospel order, we have to nurture it in business meeting, in our temporal matters, as well as in our meeting for worship. All of us have been parts of business meetings where there's friction and disagreement. And that friction is not necessarily a bad thing. Friction often is the thing that produces growth. When we're all agreeing all the time, something's probably wrong. So I've certainly found that I can come to meeting for business, and if I come in the right frame, and if I come with a determination to lay my agenda aside, even if I feel I need to express something, I find the different perspectives offered by friends, even those that I may not agree with, enlarge my understanding, if I am there in a worshipful frame of mind. To be able to let go of my own agenda is very difficult sometimes, particularly if I feel passionately about something. But I have mostly learned that the value of meeting for business is coming in a worshipful frame of mind and being willing to speak my truth and then let it go. Because the chances are that my mind may be changed. And to go to meeting for business with that realization and with that willingness to have your mind changed is another part of the great process of communal discernment. I can think of one or two times in my experience at Goose Creek where I've seen that happen on a community level. Probably, I don't know, 15 years or so ago, we were, the Janny store was up for sale next to our meeting house. It was right there, and it had been owned by the beloved Arlene and Samor Janny. It was really part of who we were. And we were given the first right of refusal in buying that property. We had a number of threshing sessions. And when the first threshing session, a lot of people, the idea was, yes, we have to buy this. It's right here. We need to protect it. It's part of our heritage. And people had lots of ideas about what we were going to do with it. And we offered, you know, we spoke about it. We spent some time in silence. We had one or two more threshing sessions. By the time we had gone through the process, we had absolute unity that we were not to buy that property. There'd been a complete change of mind. And it was extraordinary because it was a spiritually enriching experience to be part of a very temporal decision. There've been other times when things haven't gone quite as smoothly. But I look now at the threshing sessions that we have around inclusivity and accessibility and about the use of our finances and stewardship. And my hope is that we will be able to have truly spiritual experiences as we talk about these things. So, you know, we have a good tradition at Goose Creek. Another somewhat tangential, but still, I think an important way in which the community works together in temporal matters was during the invasion of the first invasion, well, the invasion of Iraq in 2004. As we led up to that, there was a lot of agony in our meeting and surprising amount of difference of opinion about what would be the right thing to do. Some of us were truly afraid of weapons of mass destruction. Others were very firmly committed to the peace testimony. And we created a series of conversations within our meeting where everybody could speak absolutely from their hearts about what they feared, what they thought, what they felt. There was no resolution, but it was an extraordinarily spiritual conversation. We accepted our differences of opinion and we continued to love each other. It was really a remarkable experience. So just finally in closing, just something about the covenant community. And I was so glad we found that video of Lloyd Lee Wilson. I love Lloyd Lee Wilson's writing. He is a very weighty friend. He comes from the conservative tradition. So he has a lot of very weighty things to say about the way Quakers have always done things and how this can be used in our lives today. So the Quaker vision of gospel order includes an understanding of the monthly meeting as a covenant community, called into being and sustained by God. In the covenant community, we choose to be in relationship with God, and God gives us to one another and to the community. Why this speaks to me so powerfully is because a covenant community essentially is a promise. One of the things about Quakerism is because we don't have baptism or confirmation or Holy Communion or Mass, we never actually sit down and say, I promise to do this. Many of us, when we arrive across the threshold, we have a kind of contingency. Commitment in our day and age is often contingent. It's contingent upon our needs being met. It's contingent upon all kinds of things. And contingency is often very useful. But in a faith tradition, I truly, and this is something from my heart that I've come to believe, is because Goose Creek, the wider Quaker world, there will always be things about it that I won't agree with, that I'll sometimes be distressed by, that I will struggle with. Every time I go to a very large Quaker gathering, it's a very big tent. There are probably at least 50% of the Quakers that I don't agree with them, their vision of what Quakerism is. I worry about secularization. I was at a Pendle Hill workshop a few weeks ago, and I was very out of unity a lot of the time with what was happening. But I have promised, I am part of a covenant community. I have promised to follow this faith path in my membership now. This is not what I thought when I became a member, but it's what I think now. I have promised to be part of this community for all of its warts, for all of its faults, for all of its flaws. I am glad to be part of this community and to be promised to this community because of its beauty, because of the love, because of its testimonies, because of the incredible effort that so many Quakers put into being a force for good in the world. Benedictine monks often, or monks generally, often give a vow of stability. I have given a vow of stability to Goose Creek and to Quakers. And I will understand that often it's the things that disturb me the most will be the things that give me the greatest spiritual and faith growth. So our monthly meetings are places for growth and change and challenge, both individually and corporately. When we understand and live into our covenantal relationship with God and each other, our meeting becomes a divine potter's wheel. This is Lloyd Lee Wilson's words again, where we are shaped into an instrument that reflects our place in gospel order. We do not fear change, and we don't cling to comfort. Instead, we take our true place in a dynamic spiritual community where transformation takes place and builds us into a people who can participate in social and political transformation beyond our meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. I need to take a breath. Okay, so we have two friends to share tonight. I'm all for spirit leading. Is Jackie or Catherine, either of you feel led to start off?
I can.
Thank you, Jackie.
It's always hard to follow. But I have to think about the community that I'm meeting with, and most of us, I believe, looking around this group, have come to Quakerism as adults, and we've had a very
Jackie?
Yes.
You're breaking up a lot on my computer? Is that true for others?
It is.
If
Jackie,
you
turn off your video. That might help.
Okay, hold on. Gone. Am I gone? Okay, I'm gone. Is that better now?
Yes.
All right.
Thanks,
and
Catherine.
Okay, thank you. I think most of us have had the experience of coming to Quakerism as adults, looking around here and looking around Goose Creek on any given Sunday. I was therefore thinking about the fact that my children and now my grandchildren have grown up in Goose Creek meeting. And so I started asking them, because for many of us coming from a different faith community, we noticed this drastic difference when we came to Quakerism. All of a sudden, the noise was gone and the pomp and the circumstance and the people telling us what to think and how to behave. So we had that to deal with coming into it, the difference. People who are raised in the community have a whole different approach. So I was talking with my children and my grandchildren, none of whom volunteered to come on with me this evening, and asked them how this developed for them, starting as babies in meeting. Dahlia, pay attention here. And They, for the most part, said that it came very naturally to them once they were old enough to realize what going to meeting means. At least the being quiet part and the being still part, after a lot of training. This did not happen automatically. But they didn't understand why we were doing this, sitting there quietly. That did not occur to them for a long time. And one of the experiences that brings this to the fore for me is watching children at our Quaker camps go to meeting, where it's all children. And they don't just sit for 15 minutes and then leave. They are the meeting. And the beginning of the week, you may have a number of children who've absolutely never sat through a meeting in their life. And there's a lot of wiggling and antsiness and drawing in the dirt and fiddling around and just all the things that children do to pass the time. And then all of a sudden, there's this feeling that comes over them, usually 2 or 3 days. They go to meeting every day in the morning for a short meeting, and they have a meeting twice a week for a longer meeting. And usually before the first long meeting, they've kind of gotten the idea, and they go in and they're all talking and laughing and being silly and pushing each other and being completely ridiculous. And then all of a sudden the director of the camp shows up and everything just stops. And you feel this letting go, I think, of you can even see their little shoulders kind of drop, and they become still and quiet, and there may still be some daydreaming, wiggling, fooling around to some extent, but there's a feeling that comes over this crowd of 100 plus children, and you begin to feel it, and the children begin to feel it, and they begin to speak out of that. And I've talked to children afterwards, and I've said things like, I really liked your message in meeting today. And they would say things like, I didn't even know I was going to say that. And that's when you really begin to feel like they're getting it. And something is happening to them other than their physical restraint, that something is going on spiritually. And I think that is one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever had with the idea of community, because we're there by choice. We go there wanting this, and this is what we go looking for. Children at camp are there to fool around and play and have fun and go swimming and hiking. This is another part of going to camp that they didn't necessarily sign up for. But by the end, it becomes such an important part of camp for them. It makes them more aware of their unity as a community and how important each and every one of them are. And I love that feeling, and I love that I can see that happening with children. And I just wanted to share that with you, since it's a unique experience. And I think that it speaks to how powerful the idea of community is. Catherine, you've seen that yourself. I'm going to turn it over to you, dear.
Thank you, Jackie. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Jackie. And we could hear you just fine, but now we can see your pretty face again, if you like. I mean, I guess I wasn't planning to, but I want to follow up a little bit on what Jackie said through the experience of my own two children, my two biological children, who grew up in Goose Creek meeting. And they went to Catoctin Quaker camp, and they did both years of the Teen Adventure program. And I have to tell you that my kids were, pretty much complete couch potatoes. They did not go for the hiking. They did not go for the swimming. They were, one was a computer nerd and one was a bookworm. But it was the community. And they also went to what are now called youth cons, the BYM Young Friends groups, because they found a kind of community there among other children and then young adults that they found nowhere else in their lives. They, you drop them off at camp and there'd be a bunch of counselors in their late teens, early 20s with, there'd be a guy with a emerald green mohawk and a counselor, and there'd be a young woman counselor with, a stud in her tongue, and there'd be, the counselors, it was immediately clear to the kids, were super cool and nothing like parents, right? And then these young people these counselors would create a community for each group of kids, and then for the whole group, that was magic. And they all learned that if you are afraid to do something, give it a try. If you're terrible at it or frightened, nobody's going to tease you. Nobody's going to give you a bad time, that you can trust the people you're with and really open up to them. And neither of my kids had that anyplace else in childhood or adolescence. And my daughter said to me just a few weeks ago, I don't know who I would be without Quaker camp. And my son, who popped out of the womb a skeptic about pretty much everything, I don't know whether he would say he's a Quaker or not, but he did, he went to a Quaker college and he did his senior project with a Quaker professor, and he is, on the history of Quakerism. And so, both of them will always be Quakers in their hearts, whatever else they do or don't do. And both of them seek out that kind of community. So thank you, Quakerism, for challenging them and giving them the freedom to express themselves with their peers without fear of derision, which is just so incredibly rare. Probably always has been, certainly is now. And it sure is what I have found in Quaker community. I was in my mid-30s when I found my way to Quakerism, and I realized that I didn't believe the doctrines that I had been raised with in Methodism, and I'd been an agnostic for a long time, and I decided, well, it was the birth of my daughter really that made me decide that the universe was a more miraculous place than I had let myself believe in. And I found this faith where it combined two things that I haven't found elsewhere in combination. One was this radical openness. So I didn't fear that if I took this spiritual path, that I would come to a place where I realized I had to leave the group because I would believe something they didn't believe. I didn't have to worry about that. But at the same time, this openness was held with this deep, deep seriousness about the spiritual journey. So this wasn't just some kind of paying lip service to, spirit. This was the real deal. And I felt, I went to a couple meetings in the DC area, but then we moved out here. And as soon as I walked into Goose Creek, I could just feel wisdom and experience around me. I felt it from people who are now, not all, but mostly gone. And I hope that I hope with all my heart that people who come to meeting anew now feel that with the passing of the old friends, many of whom were birthright friends. I hope that we're continuing to provide that sense of groundedness and charity. And I guess the other thing, two other things I want to say is I have done a little bit of the buffet stuff that Lloyd Lee talked about. I have become part of other communities without leaving Quakerism. And I know some of the people here have too. And I also actually know that Lloyd Lee Wilson's wife does too. But it has always been an extension of my rootedness, both in Quakerism and in Goose Creek meeting. So I'm free to I'm free to go to a Cynthia Bourgeois wisdom school. She's the Episcopalian hermit priest. I'm free to do a course with the Shalem Institute in DC on spiritual deepening and leading contemplative retreats. My faith was transformed and deepened by the School of the Spirit Ministry when I did a 2-year course with them. But all of these feel to me like branches on the tree, and the tree is rooted at Goose Creek. The other thing I want to say, and I was the one who contributed the midweek ministry today, is that I'm interested in lots of things, and I sometimes intellectually, dart off in one direction or another. And I can imagine myself having said, I really need to find a spiritual path and to commit myself to spiritual deepening, and then kind of forgetting about it, and community, the sense of obligation to all of you and my sense of gratitude towards all of you makes that impossible. So that the spiritual life is not just a good idea that I'll work on someday when I have a little more time. It's pretty central to my life. And even when I'm in a phase of life where I'm not feeling so awful spiritual and like sitting in the quiet, all I can do is think of what I want to plant in my garden. Even then, it's the community that keeps me going with all of you, and also brings me to the place where the spiritual inwardness becomes possible again.
Thank you, Catherine. The floor is open. Raise your hand or wave or whatever. We would welcome everyone sharing.
One of the things that I was going to mention earlier, sort of got lost, is the incredibly difficult, a lot of people have struggled with the amount of time it takes for Quakers to come to any decision. And we all have funny stories, about air conditioning, all that. But Quakerism has taken on some really, really weighty issues, and it can take a very long time. And the issue that I'm thinking of is slavery. It took 130 years from when George Fox first began to preach, and within a couple of decades, he went to Barbados, and he came to North America, and he counseled friends to be kind to their slaves. He did not call for abolition. It took 130 years from then until Philadelphia Yearly Meeting finally issued a minute in which they said, you cannot own slaves and remain a Quaker. So a lot of people think, well, why did it take Quakers so long to make such a decision about something that was so manifestly evil? Well, part of it, of course, was just culture had to change. When George Fox and those people were early Quakers, William Penn was a slave owner. Slavery was normal. That seems really, really bizarre to us now. But first one, and then another Quaker, another meeting, another small group began to bring minutes to their monthly meetings, to yearly meetings, in which they essentially objected to slavery and felt that it was not something that was possible if we are to be people of God. So even though it took 130 years, and of course we know that John Willman was very instrumental, Benjamin Lay, Anthony Benezet, there was these great sort of voices. This was still almost 100 years before the United States had to have a war to end slavery. So I think when we enter into these long-term relationships in Quaker process, we have to understand that if we're going to bring us all together, it's going to take time. So sometimes we want things to happen quickly, and they don't ever happen very quickly with Quakers. But there's a very good reason. Often is that this is how peace is achieved. This is not peace at any price, but it is, however, a way in which true transformation can take place. I doubt very much, in fact, that Quakers, the first few times they called for an end to slavery, it went nowhere, but eventually it went somewhere. So I think when we feel discouraged, we need to understand that we have in place a process that will bring progress. So I just wanted to throw that out there as to the Quaker process and how it works.
Chuck, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say, number one, this has been a very good discussion, and we're not immune from the issues of other people, in that we like to slap ourselves on the back and say how wonderful we are, and today BYM. No, I'm sorry, not BYM, but the Friends Committee on National Legislation is finally addressing another, or trying to discern, if you would, another form of slavery. And that is the slavery of the woman, or the female body. And they have not addressed the issue of abortion. They've been, and they'll tell you that, well, we're afraid it was just too divisive. And what a shame. And so the our Peace and Social Concerns Committee was approached and said, please provide your views. And we had some really interesting discussions, and we unanimously, after a time, we all agreed that women have the right to do with their bodies as they feel led. And Patricia, you just talked about the protracted period in physical slavery. I'm really keen to see how long this is going to take.
Sorry, Nate, please.
Hey, well, I really appreciate this one. I think from a lexicon perspective, being new to Quakerism, understanding when the word community is used, what scale are we talking about? And I think for a long time, I assumed it was certainly the larger community that we all live within, and our kind of more global community, just because I felt like when you talk about spices and way to live in the world, it certainly has an impact on that. And I kind of skipped over that how much the word also is used to mean specifically the membership of the meeting, and how that community is attached to the spiritual process, and that probably informs what we do with the larger communities that we're part of. But it's that community in the room that is the one that guides. So that was very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, Sean?
Yeah, when I was younger, I kind of had the impression I was going to church with my parents for ease, that we were there to kind of relax, maybe get inspired. In fact, I remember my parents complaining when they felt the pastor was getting a little too uppity and demanding too much of them. But as I got older, I found that, I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes. I'll get into something and trace, follow that thread as far as it goes. And when I come out of that rabbit hole, I'm a little altered. My thinking is a little bizarre. So when I first talk to somebody outside that rabbit hole, I realize sometimes almost immediately how strange I sound, and sometimes I don't. And to have somebody to have somebody there to catch that and point it out is invaluable. My wife often serves as that, but I go down enough rabbit holes that she's not always the right person for it. And one of the things that I always remember about why it's so important is many years ago, I led a discussion group, and it attracted a wide range of people. And there was somebody I was talking to afterwards, and we had a good amount in common, at least it seemed. However, on most everything, at some point, we start off on the same point, and then I would take a strong left turn and he'd take a strong right turn. And he was kind of an edgy person and had held a lot of conspiracy theories. And even though we might have started off on the same path, we very quickly forked. And I often kind of reflected, like, how did he end up there and I end up here? And I think it very much comes from having a community around me to prevent those errors from kind of magnifying over time. So when I think about things like slavery, communities working together a healthy community helps to shrink that error over time until it's clear that something needs to be done differently. And it even allows people to acknowledge the error was even there to begin with. But when it's not checked, it's a little bit like when your compass is off by just a degree, and then you walk just a degree off for long enough, and suddenly you're like a mile away from where you ought to be. So it gets worse. So for me, community is invaluable to keep me on track, and I don't expect the ease. I am actually grateful when somebody in a meeting for worship says something that is very different from how I feel, because it really forces me to reflect on, is that thing I hold dear really all that dear? Or is there something else that I really ought to be factoring in and thinking about?
You probably already know the traditional Quaker phrase for what you're describing is it's outrunning your guide.
Oh, I have not heard
that in a direction, and then you just go too far. And my as someone who is sort of a sluggish personality, I am likely not to keep up with my guide, but community helps in both cases.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing too, you know, about Quaker meetings is because we can't outsource the work to the priest or the pastor. Since we have a tradition where we are all ministers, we all are called to bring our gifts to the meeting and make the way in which friends sometimes call it, you have to name your gifts and claim your gifts, as in, if you have a particular gift for eldering or for vocal ministry or for hospitality or for finance, you should be aware of that, and we should help you to become aware of that. And then you claim it, which means you take accountability for it and you use it for the good of the meeting. So it's not such a case of, well, I'm really good at this, so look at me. It's a case of, I'm good at this. What can I do with this to build the meeting? Which I think is just a wonderful thing. And that's where you cross that threshold from coming to a meeting or a faith tradition saying, what can this do for me, to what can I do for this faith tradition? And when you've crossed that threshold, you're in a completely different relationship with both the community and your place within gospel order, within restoring right relationship, which is a phrase I absolutely love.
Off mute. Anyone feel led to speak? I do have a query. I'm going to try once more to share my screen. Perhaps that will stimulate some thought. How has the Friends community, both at Goose Creek and beyond, enrich your faith journey and deepen your understanding of the Quaker way? Perry?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I said this on Sunday on our Zoom, which was Pentecost. And I think the great discovery I've made at Goose Creek meeting is the miracle of listening. And the miracle of Pentecost was the disciples could speak in many languages. But then there was also what I think was an even greater miracle. The crowd listening could hear the disciples each in their own language. And that kind of listening, when we listen together at Quaker meeting, we hear each other. We can hear each other. And even things that are phrased differently from the way I might have phrased them, suddenly I hear it in my own language. I can translate it. I can think about what I can give to the place. So it is the gift of listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. I think my time as a Quaker right now, I find the gift is for me to feel uncomfortable. The exchange and the introduction this evening, it brought me to a point of juxtaposing me pre-Quaker, me trying to be a Quaker. And what I remember of myself pre-Quaker was I was never uncomfortable. I was a professional Christian, if there is such a thing. I was very happy to speak up if someone wanted to know what a Bible verse was, or if someone wanted to hear a witness of faith or whatever. And I immersed myself constantly by reading books and exchanging stories. But it was always predictable, you know. There was something about becoming a Christian as a Methodist, as a Baptist, whatever churches I visited, that everyone said the same thing. We all were coming from the same place. We all were one blend. And what Quakerism is for me is the exact opposite of that. And it's been alluded to by several people who spoke this evening. We don't agree. We make each other uncomfortable, and we are uniform and in unity in one thing, and that is seeking and honoring the truth. And I think what I did pre-Quaker was live a lie. You know, everything's good. God loves me. Praise the Lord. And I mean, I can listen to gospel songs all day long, believe me. But that's not me growing. That's not me embracing God and saying, God, I'm open. Change me. Let me learn. And that's me as a Quaker.
I think one of the distinctives of Quakerism is that whenever you always have to entertain the idea that you may be wrong. You know, you can't say, here's the truth, this is what's right. There's always that thought, but you know, back of your head, I may be wrong.
Anne?
When I first came to Goose Creek, I was very lucky to be around Arlene and Emily and Ethel and Irma. And right away, it was obvious to me that they made a huge effort to make sure that every new person or that came to Goose Creek was part of the community. And so many times I found myself in places with one of them or several of them doing something that I never thought I would be doing. And it was never force-fed in any way. It was all very organic, but it became very clear to me that the most important thing was to be a part of the community, no matter what you believed. But just to show up, to be a part, to be there was everything to them. And they were a tremendous example of what community was to them and how important it was that they scooped everyone up who was around to be a part of that community. And I'm so grateful that I was there at that time. And I often think about them and hope that that I can behave in the same way that they did. It was a magical time, and I often hope and really pray that we can continue that wonderful tradition that they so embraced.
Thank you. Wow.
I used to say that I wanted to be Arlene Janney when I grew up, but I think now that I'm in my 70s, I'm grown up. So, and I'm not Arlene Janney. You know, I just wanted to give an extremely abbreviated account of perhaps the most painful thing that has come up or happened in meetings since I started coming to Goose Creek in 1990. And I will not go into it or name names or whatever, but the issue, there were long discussions about gay marriage, and we did not have a couple presenting themselves. So, you know, the conversations could go on kind of forever. And there was a member of meeting who was who thought in biblical terms and really was explained very clearly, but in an extremely Quakerly way, objections to the rest of it. And there was another member of meeting deeply versed in Quakerism who was very strident in support of gay marriage. And virtually everyone in meeting agreed with the second person and thought that we should definitely, you know, allow gay marriage when such a request was made of us. But that person, the person everybody basically agreed with, behaved in a most unquakerly way and actually broke the bond of community in a serious, you know, name calling kind of way. And I still remember sitting in that meeting room and hearing this loud, audible gasp that came from everyone in the room. Though they agreed with her on the issue, she had broken the bond of community, and that was more important in everyone's hearts than the specific issue. So all ended well, and after writing many long minutes and many long things, we just like added an extra sentence, I think, to the meeting's own faith and practice, saying that, you know, any couple who wishes to be married under care of the meeting will be, you know, subject to the same process as every other couple. So in the end, it was a simple thing, but that was an extraordinary moment, and I have never loved my meeting more than I did that day.
Powerful witness. Thank you. Wow. Okay.
And you don't have to look around and think, who was that? Because that person no longer is part of Goose Creek meeting.
Oh.
not right out of meeting, but just kind of gradually disappeared.
Other sharing? Anyone? Okay. Well, if we could, we'll close with a moment of silence, please.